A good job, Paige. Paige Dolci is, she works for Mass Audubon Society, and I'm going to let her correct me where I'm wrong, but she's worked for several years on the Shaping Our Communities, the Future of Our Communities project, which works with Massachusetts communities, thinking about how to prepare for climate change, among other things, and how to build more sustainability into the community. I know Paige has been familiar with Municipal Vulnerabilities Preparedness project to some extent too, has worked with the state on that. So she's a real rich resource for us relating to water issues and climate change. I'll let you finish your introduction, Paige. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Will. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see this, Will?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, great. Yeah, so my name is Paige Dolci. I'm a climate resilience coordinator at Mass Audubon. So I'm going to talk about nature for climate resilience, specifically for water issues. And I'll talk for about 25 minutes. And then I was hoping we could do a little activity at the end on the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that Will mentioned. So, Shaping Climate Resilient Communities program. This is the program that I work for. It's within Mass Audubon's Advocacy department. And with the Shaping program, I mainly perform outreach and provide technical assistance to communities in order to increase climate resilience, especially through the use of nature and what we call low impact development. And we work in what we call the sprawl frontier, which is made up of the fastest developing areas in Massachusetts, including Southeast Mass, where Danica Warrens is focused, our other climate resilience coordinator, and Metro West Massachusetts, where I'm focused. So just some actions that the program strives towards. So we do a lot of workshops, sharing information about sustainable planning and sustainable development for climate resilience. We assist communities in Massachusetts with what we call bylaw reviews. So we review a municipality's bylaws and regulations and help them update those bylaws and regulations to better protect open space and build climate resilience. We also help guide communities through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness planning process, and I'm going to describe this program more later. So for the future, our goal is to increase the number of municipalities using nature to increase climate resilience locally. And here is just the program team, so you can get to know us. Alexandra Vecchio, the Climate Change Program Director, Christina Wiseman, the Advocacy Operations Manager, myself, and Danica Warrens. So I think most of you already know about climate change and are probably well versed in it. So I'm just going to do a pretty brief overview to intro us. So climate change, it's warming. 9 of the 10 warmest years have occurred since 2005, and 2019 was the second warmest year on record. It's us. So here we have atmospheric CO2 concentrations rising that correlates with temperature rise. We're sure. So 97% of the scientific community agrees that climate change is happening and that it's human caused. But fossil fuel companies have spent more than $1 billion on misinformation campaigns. So it's bad. The impacts of climate change fall into 3 categories: societal/human. So impacts to people include an increase in vector-borne illnesses. So from mosquitoes, for example, that thrive in warmer temperatures, higher rates of respiratory illness due to increasing air pollution, displacement from homes because of flooding, and heat-related illnesses from the urban heat island effect, which is just a warmer environment in urban areas because of all of the impervious surface. Infrastructural, so severe storms, flooding, and fires damage and destroy roads, homes, and other parts of the built environment. And lastly, environmental / ecological. So extinction and threatened survival for species, habitat loss, and erosion. So next I'm going to talk about the connection between climate change and development, because they're really inextricably linked. So basically, development compounds the risks that climate change already poses on our communities. So one impact of climate change is increased precipitation, and therefore water quality issues and flooding issues, which can lead to infrastructure damage and polluted water. Increased temperature is another impact. Therefore, heat-related illnesses that I mentioned before, and impacts to wildlife, especially fish and aquatic life. So sprawling development, which creates more impervious surface that water cannot move through and that absorbs heat, compounds these two climate change impacts. So focusing in on stormwater. So a big threat to our drinking water is stormwater runoff. So what's the problem with stormwater? So basically you have a large rainstorm, water pools on impervious surface like this asphalt and brick in Somerville. It picks up pollutants like pesticides, metals, sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus. And as the water runs into our infrastructure, our pipes, drains, it carries all of these pollutants to our public and private water supplies. And on the way, can damage our infrastructure as well. So here's just a map showing the most intensified hazards that we're likely to see in 2050 with a high emissions scenario of climate change. So basically that means we're continuing business as usual with our emissions. So as you can see on the East Coast, precipitation is by far the most intensified hazard for us, and followed by sea level rise as well. Okay, so moving on to solutions. So we know the impacts of climate change that we just went over, but we also know the steps to take to solve it. So basically we want to reduce emissions, remove emissions, and adapt to emissions. And we can use nature to accomplish this. So I was hoping to play a video. Let me know if you can hear this.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about the solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
Everything counts. What you do counts.
So that was Greta on why use nature for climate solutions and particularly for mitigation. So reducing emissions by natural areas absorbing carbon and then keeping that carbon so it's not released as CO2 and contributing to climate change. So that was obviously a pretty broad scale, large scale and global. And it didn't really cover adaptation as much. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And I'm also going to talk about nature-based solutions on a smaller, more local scale. So in Massachusetts. So a great thing about nature-based solutions to climate change is its diversity. So it can really be done at any scale, from the most rural communities to the most urban. And nature-based solutions address multiple hazards to humans and provide co-benefits to communities like cost savings from avoided damage, public health benefits, and environmental services like absorbing carbon and storing carbon. So when we're thinking about sustainable land use planning in the context of climate change and water specifically, we want to conserve the natural green infrastructure already providing the free services, integrate low impact development and green infrastructure design into development, and we're going to talk about low impact development next, and restore local resilience through low impact development in redevelopment. So first we're going to start with OneConserve. So this is a resource that shares the value and benefits of natural areas with a focus on ecosystems that are already intact, so not human-built gardens, for example. So these benefits include climate resilience benefits, clean air and water, carbon capture and storage, economic and health, recreation and tourism, and more. So in terms of communications, we created these to try to address the challenge of getting cities and towns to prioritize nature, which is a big part of the program that I'm involved in. So sharing the economic and public health benefits of nature is important for doing this, particularly when you're trying to convince. So I'm just going to give a couple example stats from these fact sheets, and they're available at massaudubon.org/value of nature if you think they might be useful in your work. So wetlands, or coastal wetlands in the northeastern US saved 625 million in flooding damages by Hurricane Sandy. From the Wetlands and Waterways fact sheet, for every $1 spent on source water protection, $27 is saved in water treatment costs. And lastly, the value of green space in cities should not be overlooked, especially when we're thinking about vulnerable populations. So marginalized and low-income urban communities often are farther away from green space and more negatively impacted by things like the urban heat island effect and air pollution. These communities are also expected to face the brunt of future climate change impacts like flooding, storms, and droughts. So this stat here, every year, urban forests in the 15 communities of Metro West Boston help avoid 527 million gallons of stormwater runoff, which is worth $4.7 million per year. They also remove 7.5 million pounds of air pollutants and store enough carbon to be worth 125 million annually. So number 2, integrate low impact development. So low impact development are development design standards that utilize plants and soils in capturing and filtering water while you minimize overall imperviousness. And impervious surfaces can be asphalt, brick, pavement, and so on, concrete. Low impact development treats water as a resource and not just a waste product. It manages stormwater as close to its source as possible instead of moving it and treating it elsewhere. And it preserves natural landscapes by recreating natural features. So for stormwater specifically, not only can nature keep our water clean, it can also ensure that we have enough of it. So when stormwater infiltrates into the ground with vegetation, instead of running across it with impervious surface, our groundwater resources are replenished. And this groundwater recharge is especially important given climate change, since we're supposed to see and are already seeing an increase in droughts. So an ample groundwater supply can help ensure that we do not run out of water when there is not much rain. And these graphics just show the different amount of infiltration you'll see in a natural landscape versus a highly developed landscape. So some examples of low impact development, rain gardens. So this one in Devons gathers runoff from a sidewalk and curbless road to infiltrate stormwater back into the ground. Green roofs, so this top one is in Boston in a more urban area, and the bottom one is in Vermont on a barn, so more rural. And then permeable pavement. So this parking lot shows traditional asphalt on the left, and you can see the puddling of the water, the rainwater, and then permeable pavement on the right where it has soaked through. So 3, restore. This is just one example from Mass Audubon's Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary in Worcester. So they built 4 rain gardens in 2017 to manage stormwater from a parking lot that was recently expanded and rooftop runoff. It had an intentional design based on runoff calculations and future temperatures. They used native species for pollinators, and it had some educational features as well. And then another, Provincetown. So Commercial Street is parallel to beaches and has had limited drainage. So after summer storms, beaches would regularly close due to high bacteria levels in the water. So in 2012, they changed Commercial Street to feature mostly porous pavement. So this porous pavement has a higher than normal percentage of air voids to allow water to pass through it. And because of this project, they saw cleaner water in Provincetown Harbor. So in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change, we need advocacy and your voices. So I wanted to just really quickly go over advocating in your community. So you can create change at different levels, the state level, in your town or city, or in your school. So at the state level, I wanted to share a resource for finding out who represents you. So who would you be contacting if you wanted to create change at the state level? So through this resource, you can enter your home address, Click on your representative's name, and in 3 minutes, you can find out who represents you and how to contact them. So you want to have a who, what, and why when you're connecting with legislators. So to help with the what, once you know who your legislators are through the previous slide, you can sign up for our Beacon Hill weekly roundup through Mass Audubon's Advocacy department. So that's at massaudubon.org/advocacy. And every week there's a new newsletter, and we share priority legislation that we would like our readers to advocate for, so to contact your legislators about. You can also advocate for programs in your town or city. Advocacy isn't just changing laws. So the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, I'm going to focus on that next. The Green Communities Program and the Green Community Choice Irrigation Program are just a couple of examples. Okay, so on to the MVP program. So the MVP program, or Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, provides funding for communities to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And the program prioritizes projects that use nature-based solutions. So individuals can visit their website to see if their community is MVP certified and how they can get involved in the process. But 89% of Massachusetts communities are already participating, so it's become quite large. So the principles of the program, it's intended to be community-led, accessible, and employ local knowledge. It's supposed to utilize partnerships, use the best available climate projections, and again, it employs nature-based solutions. So it starts with the planning stage. So stakeholders are invited to come together for a day-long workshop or 2 half-days to identify hazards in the community and risks and vulnerabilities to those hazards. So what's the difference between those terms? So vulnerabilities determine a hazard's impact on the community. So coastal storms could be a hazard, but infrastructure to deal with those coastal storms being weak would be a vulnerability. And then the town will also, or city, would also identify priority actions for addressing their vulnerabilities. And then for the planning stage, it's really important that the people at the meeting accurately represent the makeup of the community. So for example, it's important that low-income community or neighborhoods also be at the table, given the brunt of climate change impacts that they face that we talked about before. Another example of having the right people at the table is in reference to nature-based solutions. So the main goal of MVP is to encourage nature-based solutions, but if none of the stakeholders at the meeting know of their usefulness, then it probably won't make it into the plan.
Can I interrupt, Paige, just for a second? People should know that youth are considered to be an underrepresented group and are welcomed to be participants in the MVP process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and on their website, that's why I mentioned checking to see if your community is already designated and how to get involved. And they have MVP coordinators in each region of Massachusetts now, since it's expanded. So there's a contact person for wherever you live in Massachusetts. Where was I? Okay, so next is the action stage. So once a community has gone through the planning stage and has their lists of risks and vulnerabilities and priority actions, they're an MVP designated community, and they're eligible to apply for funds to actually complete their priority actions. So here are just some planning grant results that are pretty recent. So top hazards in terms of water, inland flooding, severe winter storms, other severe weather, and drought were the top ones. Top vulnerabilities, stormwater management, infrastructure, natural resources, emergency management, and preparedness. And then stormwater management also made it into top action. So clearly water is a big issue and important for many communities in Massachusetts. And then here is just an example project that's coming up in FY21. And this is in Malden, and they're going to be redeveloping a resilient public riverfront park. They have a community-based planning and design process in place, engaging community leaders of color, youth, environmental advocates, and government stakeholders. So the park is going to feature LID features like bioswales, trees. They're going to do invasive species removal to help the ecology of the area, and riparian habitat restoration. Okay, so that's all for me in terms of the presentation. And I can send this PowerPoint as well, so you have all of this and all of the links. But there's my contact information. We have a monthly e-newsletter for climate change. That's Climate Connection. There's the link to access that. And then that Beacon Hill weekly roundup I spoke about is again at massaudubon.org/advocacy. And I'm also happy to answer questions about any of this and help direct people further if anything is confusing. But I'll stop sharing now, and then hopefully we can do the activity for a little bit.
Okay, scary Brita voice from the background here. John and Soma and Wendell, I'm gonna allow you to talk. Send me a message if you don't want to be allowed to talk. But I think, and if you're okay, I mean, I can also promote you if you want to have videos up. I'd be willing to. I can promote you to. Oh, John says he's on a train. So, well, we'll let you. If you have anything you want to say, please go ahead and do that. And Soma and Wendell, do you want to be panelists so you can have your video too if you want, or you can just be.
Yay, John, for saving energy and being on a train.
Yay. All right. Will, why don't you put your video back on so that you're a face here. And I'm going to mute myself again.
Okay, I'm going to pop Google Drive link into the chat.
Britta, it tells me that the host has stopped my video.
Now I'll let you. Will's back. Yay.
Great. Okay, so hopefully everyone could open that Google Drive. Let me know if you can't. You should have access though. So basically I wanted to do a mock MVP planning workshop. So we went over the steps of the MVP planning stage, and now I wanted to try to role playing in our own workshop. So the MVP process is for a whole municipality, but today we'll just be focusing on one site. And we're assuming that earlier in the day you work together to come up with a list of 4 of the biggest hazards that your community will face from climate change. So we're assuming that that already happened. So can everyone open the Google Drive? I'm not sure if everyone is sitting at a laptop and can do this.
Hey, did you send us the link?
Yeah, it's in the chat. Do you see it?
Yeah, I've got it.
Hold on, let me. Hold on.
No.
It might be all panelists.
It just went to the panelists.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. Good.
Yeah, so in that link, you'll see 3 different handouts. So handout 1 are the instructions, handout 2 is a site description, and then handout 3 are the roles. So the roles / this activity would only work if people wanted to talk. So maybe Britta, you could confirm that first. But if people don't want to talk, I can just walk you through this. So you could get a sense of what this would be, or what this workshop would be like.
Wendell, I'm making you a panelist. It's gonna bump you over. You don't get a
If you're
choice,
not-
'cause you're on the committee.
Gonna hurt, Wendell.
It's okay.
Come be a guinea pig with us. And Soma, it's entirely, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I apologize for not. It's entirely up to you if you would like to come here on screen with us. If not, type away.
Okay. I'll just go forth as if I'm doing it myself. Okay. You can still follow along. So I hope you have the Google Drive open at least. And you can look at the site background with me. So this is an example in South Portland, Maine.
Which one is that? I see.
Handout 2.
Oh, site description.
Yeah.
There we go.
Site description.
Read past the first word. Okay.
It's okay. So this is in South Portland, Maine, and it's overlooking nearby Portland Harbor. It's a hub for retail and industry in the region. Close proximity to air, marine, rail, and highway transportation, and a significant, a significant feature of the study site is Sprague Terminal, which stores and distributes heating oil, gasoline, diesel, and other materials by truck out of South Portland. So we've already identified the top hazards of this area, and those are extreme precipitation events, extreme heat and drought, coastal flooding, and hazardous waste from Sprague Terminal. And then this first map just shows an aerial photo. And then on the next page, if you scroll, you'll see median household income. So as you can see, the area that we're looking at has a lower income bracket. And then down to the next map is coastal flood hazard. So South Portland next to the harbor is all in a coastal hazard zone, meaning it's at risk for flooding from the coast during storms. And then I suppose I won't share the roll sheet. So if we could go to the instructions probably next.
So that's this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically what we would do in this activity is, given the priority hazards we identified, we'd find the potential risks and vulnerabilities at this specific location. So for the MVP program workshop, we would do it for an entire municipality. So different stakeholders would have different opinions on what are priority risks and vulnerabilities in a community. And the three types of vulnerabilities are societal. So those could be low impact neighborhoods, homeless populations, access to schools, environmental. So those would be erosion, water pollution, green space, and so on. Infrastructural, so evacuation routes, stormwater infrastructure, etc. So what you would do is you would come up with a list during the workshop of risks and vulnerabilities. So in this case, what we could see on that map is that it is in a lower income area. So a low income neighborhood would probably be on our list of vulnerabilities. Environmental, so something that might be on our list is water pollution, as we are right by the harbor. And Sprague Terminal has hazardous waste, so that definitely could affect the water quality of the nearby harbor. We could also say that there is a lack of green space in the area, and that's an environmental vulnerability. And then infrastructural. So as we saw in the site description, there is a route that materials from Sprague Terminal leave South Portland, and say that's flooded, we don't necessarily have alternatives for travel. So that could definitely be a vulnerability of the area. Stormwater infrastructure could also be another infrastructural vulnerability. Yeah, so you would want to pay attention to, so during an MVP workshop, you would look at different maps of the municipality, and you would ideally have representatives that can speak to societal, environmental, and infrastructural risks and vulnerabilities. So then once you do this step, then you could move on to number 3. So once during the MVP workshop, when you've identified your risks and vulnerabilities, you would then work together to reach a consensus on 3 priority actions your community wants to take to address one or more of the risks and vulnerabilities you identified. So the different roles again come into play here. So depending on, for example, if you're a conservation specialist, if you're an economic development official, if you're an environmental planner, you're going to have different priorities and you're going to be advocating for different priority actions. And some other things to consider: who benefits from the action. So you want as many people to benefit from the action as possible. Does the action provide a short-term or long-term solution? This is another thing that you'd make note of during the workshop. And then co-benefits associated with the action. So ideally you have actions that address multiple of your risks and vulnerabilities. And so priority actions here that address our risks and vulnerabilities could be establishing, creating a good evacuation plan, good evacuation route in place, especially given Sprague Terminal. It could be incorporating more green space to address the increase in precipitation hazard that we have, which is number 1. So more water can be infiltrating and not running off. And that would also help address potential water pollution in the harbor. And then you also might want to have a specific engagement plan for some of those low-income neighborhoods. So, and then lastly, I suppose we could just look at the roles list handout. So you could get a sense of the type of individuals that would be at an MVP planning workshop. So emergency planning official, local developer, those working in public transportation, and yeah, so definitely the outcome of your MVP planning workshop can change depending on who's at the table. So again, having someone in the environmental field is really important if you want to encourage the use of nature-based solutions. Having a low-income area represented, it would be really important to have, for example, a local environmental justice organization representative. And also it's important to ensure that there's accurate representation of a community, but this is often difficult in terms of event accessibility. So what if someone works 9 to 5? What if someone has a child that they would have to take with them? Can there be childcare offered? What if someone doesn't speak English? So in terms of community engagement in general, those are some things to think of as well. So it's about all I have. And I definitely take questions. I know we didn't actually do the activity, but happy to take questions on the presentation in general. Or
I have a thought about this activity. As I look at the list of roles and think about the Envirothon team members who want to use this activity and try it out. I can imagine they'd look at that role and say, I don't know what that person thinks. I don't know. And so I would suggest to the team that they go through this activity and use it as a tool to generate questions. What questions would do you think this person might be involved in, and how would you, what would you want to ask them about? Yeah, so to sharpen your questions about the topic.
Sure. Yeah, and if we had actually assigned roles, I do give a description of the role to the person so that they know what they're talking about.
I was imagining that you would give a paragraph, and that would be really important to start the question generation. Yeah.
Sure.
You see John's message here in the chat, which I'll read out loud. How are low impact development methods evaluated in Massachusetts? Are there any studies looking at changing groundwater levels in communities with and without these projects?
I don't know of any studies looking at changing groundwater levels, but you might want to look at, let me find the tool. If you go to massaudubon.org/bylaw review, so this is how we evaluate a town's bylaws and regulations for their use of low impact development. And we use kind of state requirements in terms of the effectiveness and best practices of low impact development in there. But in terms of studies looking at a specific community, I'm not entirely sure. We have low impact development fact sheets that give you information as to the effectiveness of specific techniques, not necessarily in a specific community though. And they go into the cost savings of the different techniques as well. So I'll put that link in here.
I know that the U.S. Geological Survey has, trying to think of the name, it's an acronym, a satellite system that measures the presence of water, both deep underground and in the soil and on the surface of the planet. It's just amazing what they can do. And I think that they have historical data too, so that you could look over time at changes in groundwater. I remember a few years ago, when was it? We just had an incredibly rainy season and growing season, and a lot of farms were going out of business just because they were swamped, literally. And how the organic farms, because they were getting the same amount of rainfall, but because of their the soil structure on the farm and the carbon content of the soil, were able to weather, so to speak, that flooded growing season a little better. So it's interesting that the water issue is not only the deep water and the groundwater, but also in the soil level. Of course, they're all connected, but and then the stormwater too. Fascinating stuff. I can try to get that USGS website.
Grace satellite, is that it? John's looking for it. Since he found it. Was that the one you're talking about? Well?
Used it in her workshop.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, you're probably going to find it faster than I do. So I would just say I'm really grateful to Paige for including in the whole scope of your presentation the importance of citizen action and contacting your legislator, the different levels of government that are involved and how they're involved. We're recognizing more and more that Envirothon current issue is a civics project as well as a environmental science project, and the two are, you can't do good environmental science and not carry it through to the citizen level if you're thinking holistically. And you can't do good citizen action unless you understand the environmental science. So,
Definitely.
so we really appreciate the focus, the broad focus that you folks bring to this.
Of course, yeah. I'm always happy to answer any questions after this as well. I think we could probably share my PowerPoint, Britta.
Thanks. I would love to do that if I could.
Yeah.
And I'll put all the links in the description of the recorded video too. So
Yeah.
that's easy for people to find. All right, any other questions from our attendees here about that you want to ask Paige? Well, we've got her right here. It's not like a phone.
Paige, I just wondering, how is it that you work with towns? I mean, you come in as consultants, other than, you know, looking at your program, your website and resource you have available, you actually meet with towns that are working on, say, a municipal vulnerability plan.
Yeah, so we're certified. One thing is that we're certified providers of the MVP program. So we've helped with the workshops, as they typically, the towns will ask someone else to come in, which is sometimes Mass Audubon, sometimes a consulting firm, to come in and facilitate. So that's just one way. And then we're on a lot of collaborative grants with municipalities on projects related to climate resilience, like ecological restoration and things like that. And a main thing we do is our bylaw reviews. So that's massaudubon.org/bylaw review. So we work with towns to review all of their bylaws and regulations and recommend updates to them, and a large recommendations report, and it's a whole tool. So we've done that with many communities, and now we're creating a bylaw review curriculum so that we don't necessarily have to be doing this for towns, but our intent there is to be able to teach municipalities and nonprofits and so on how to review their own bylaws and regulations to better allow for open space protection and increasing climate resilience. So that's the bylaw review is definitely a main thing of the program.
Okay, thank you. I'll look at that. Thank you.
I can put that in the chat too.
Yeah, one other thing. How do you align these two, like the national climate assessment? And I think that was shown in your map. Does look at the Northeast as an area where there would be higher precipitation, but how do we, you know, align that with our current drought conditions too? So, yeah.
Yeah. So the higher precipitation is often goes hand in hand with then periods of drought. So a lot of precipitation in a short period of time, and then followed by a period of drought as well. So those two often go hand in hand as well.
Yep.
So it's not, you know, precipitation spread out and you know, keeping our supply stable. It's becomes so
precipitation events, and it doesn't necessarily recharge your aquifers. It's
it's running off kind of most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
I was just going to say that you have a sweet last name.
Oh, yes. Italian speaker.
Thank you so much, Paige, for being with us this evening, and to all our attendees for tuning in. And I'll get this recording posted as soon as I can.
Thanks.
Other teams
Thanks
can
for doing
check
this.
it out.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.